Welcome back, James Walls, Senior Vice President of Programs and Initiatives, Mission Investors Exchange.
Two things before we start. First, for those that were here for the opening session, please know I did better for myself. I'm speaking before any of the speakers that come up. Second, no singing, but please wish a happy birthday to MIE's CEO, Matt Einig. Now we can transition. To all of you, thank you for joining us for the closing session of the MIE conference. It has been an informative, inspiring couple of days. During this session, we will feature our final panel, spotlighting place-based strategies that are becoming increasingly important in today's times. Following the discussion, Matt will introduce our closing keynote speaker, Brian Stevenson. Place-based impact investing is a cornerstone investment strategy for many of you in the room, and a strategy experiencing a significant amount of growth and momentum. It involves a deep understanding of social, economic, infrastructure, political, and the individual human dynamics of a community. And that is before investment even takes place. More often than not, these dynamics can be far more complicated than the investments themselves. The following panelists all understand this extremely well. We are fortunate to have representatives from different regions and organizational types to share more about their efforts, successes, and lessons learned. With that, I am honored to invite to the stage our panelists for a conversation that will be moderated by Kevin Walker of the Northwest Area Foundation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? So you know that old saying, we're the last thing standing between you and lunch. This is way worse. We are the last thing standing between you and the great Brian Stevenson. So we're going to try to be good and then get out of Brian's way. So welcome to this conversation. Again, I'm Kevin Walker, President and CEO of the Northwest Area Foundation. And I think I should start by trying to set the context a little before I introduce our panelists and we really have what I hope will be a rich conversation. Setting the context right now, there's a lot of context. And I want to actually set the context in the terms we've been listening to over the last several days here at MIE. First of all, extraordinary conference. Let's just take a minute to appreciate the birthday guy and the amazing team. And the staff of this beautiful hotel who have taken such good care of all of us. And we are, at least in my own experience, the third sort of session like this on the stage. And I wanted to set the context by pulling forward some of the great stuff we heard from this stage earlier in the conference. So cast your mind back to Don Chen sitting in this chair from the Surdin Foundation. And the one nugget from the conversation that Don facilitated that I want to pull back in, there seems to be a bit of a staying on the front foot club within this room, or a we're not changing a word club within this room that my organization is a proud member of, the we're not scrubbing our website club, the we are still about what we have always said we're about club. That came through really strongly from Don, from the Nathan Cummings Foundation, from the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. I just really appreciated that. And for those of us who have been able within the privileged world of philanthropy to continue to be about what we say we're about, thank you. So Northwest Area Foundation, our purpose, our mission is to stand alongside change makers in our region of 8 states and 76 native nations and fund work that leads to racial, social, and economic justice. When you say that's what you're about, what words are you then going to change, right? So we are proud members of the Staying on the Front Foot Club, and I want to thank all of you who have been able to do the same, including my colleagues up here on the stage. I want to move forward then to the amazing panel that John Palfrey facilitated yesterday, which was just full of cool stuff. First of all, Stephen Hines showed up, he said, dressed like a banker so that he could talk like a radical. For my money, so he's retiring in 8 weeks, he talked like an elder in waiting. He talked like a sage when he said that he thinks we're at a hinge moment in history when we can lose the democracy that we have. And he urged us, if you were in the room, to fight to hold on to the democracy that we have so that we can build the future democracy that we need. That was so beautifully said that I was like, man, that dude should retire more often. That was really inspiring. And then John and Tanya Allen, my friend from the McKnight Foundation, worked back and forth on something that I gather Tanya says, which my translation of this is, your asset base is not an excuse for caution and self-preservation, right? Our assets are our invitation to lead boldly. And I had not heard that formulation before, and I loved it. And then finally, Tanya said something I've heard her workshopping a little bit, which is, I think in these times, the local saves the national. I don't know if that's true, but somebody was asking me over dinner last night, what gives you hope? And after 20 minutes of thinking, I was like, that thing about the local saves the national, maybe that's the perfect on-ramp to our conversation today. So today we're going to talk about place-based impact investing with folks who are deep in it and have a lot to share. And I will do a brief introduction of this Fab 3 and then invite you all to say a little more as we talk it through. So Frank Fernandez, President and CEO of the Atlanta Area Community Foundation. Karen McNeil-Miller, my good friend and the CEO of the Colorado Health Foundation. And Lata Reddy with Prudential and the chair of the Prudential Foundation. So here we are to see what sense we can make about this topic. And we will start, Frank, am I right that you are one of the co-chairs of this conference?
I am.
So we're starting in Atlanta with our co-chair and a nationally known expert on affordable housing issues and deep in local impact investing in Atlanta through Go Atlanta and other strategies. And we just want to tee you up to share as much as you'd like about the foundation and your journey here. But what does local place-based impact investing look like and feel like for you? How are you building a local ecosystem of investment? What do we need to hear from Atlanta to kick us off?
Great, thank you. So thank you all for being here in our fair city and region. Hopefully you were able to get out a little bit outside of the hotel, even though the hotel is a really great venue. I want to really start in the same vein that Kevin did in terms of really thinking about what are those themes that have been risen to the surface over the last couple of days. And two things for me that I think ground my response to your question around place-based impact investing is, the first is how we think, define, and reimagine risk and what kinds of risk, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then this focus on place, this focus on local, right? As he said, the local saves the national, as Tanya said yesterday. And because of the reality that I think many of us have experienced in our communities across, over the last 12 months or so, is that the cavalry isn't coming. We are the cavalry, right, at the local level. And those two things are really the foundation for us of our impact investing. Whenever we take on any new strategic endeavor, really ask ourselves two big questions. The first, as a place-based civic institution, what are our community's biggest needs? Because we're set up to be responsive to those. So understanding that in a lot of depth. And then second, what are we uniquely positioned to contribute towards that? Because as we know, our mayor likes to say, housing and other things are a group project. This is not one person, one entity's within their ability to do by themselves. You have to work together and figure out what your role is. And so for us, we started to do that with the issue of housing. In a lot of communities, housing has become a top 3 community issue. And for us, over the last really 10 years or so, it really has bubbled to the surface as the #1 issue for our current mayor, for example, who calls housing his love language. And because of this big need, and because of some of the history that we have in housing as well as impact investing, we felt that we were well positioned to be both aggregate and allocate philanthropic and impact capital to support the housing needs of our community. And for us, we started with, well, where do we want to focus? Deeper affordability, long-term affordability, and really support communities that are more, and populations that are more vulnerable, especially legacy residents. Atlanta has some of the highest gentrification rates in the country, so what are we doing to really focus there? And what we ultimately did was, several years ago, made a $200 million commitment to affordable housing. $100 million of philanthropic capital, $100 million of impact capital. And we had a thesis, an investment thesis, that we're going to be that but-for capital and really try to leverage our dollars where projects are getting stuck, especially those that have that criteria of deeper and longer term affordability. Really think about how we are flexible and how we structure what our investments are, and making sure that we're willing and able to take risk, right? And so there was what we thought would happen, and then there was what happened, right? Because we had all kinds of presumptions. And the key thing for us was being flexible and leaning into this idea of being risk capital, using our concessionary capital to be able to move projects. And so what ended up happening, which wasn't the original idea, was we ended up creating like 5 or 6 different products using 2 different pools of capital. We did grants, 0% forgivable loans, very low cost loans, preferred equity investments, guarantees, to really try to work with for-profits, nonprofits, joint ventures in our community, in our region, to preserve and accelerate the production of affordable housing. And so over the last 3 years, we've been able to invest in about 55 projects, about $120 million of capital committed. That translates to about a little over 5,000 units preserved and produced. And part of why we were able to do that, and this kind of gets to the local, is that we as a community foundation and a place-based institution have context, so we know who all the players are and all the actors and have built credibility with them. And we have the infrastructure, because we already had an impact investment platform to be able to build from. And so for us, it is really a foundational part of our strategy about how we want to have impact in the community, how we leverage this tool. These folks now, I was just at a board meeting, we were talking about our next strategic plan, and a big bulk of the conversation was focused on how do we continue to scale the work we're doing in impact investing, because it has been so fruitful for us and for the community.
Awesome. Well, let's jump geography and funder type and pull Lata in, deeply rooted in Newark with Prudential, and just unpack for us a little bit how place-based investing works for you and for the corporation.
Sure. So good afternoon, everybody. It is wonderful to be here. And you'll hear some similar themes to what Frank raised, not surprisingly. But one fun fact that I'll start with is Prudential was founded 151 years ago in Newark. And we were purpose-built to provide insurance to working families, so then known as the industrial class, the folks working in the breweries, the tanneries, and the other factories. And so our commitment to Newark is our commitment to home. It's our hometown. We've remained headquartered there, even though we're now a global financial services firm. And so it's something our employees and all of us are quite proud of. So when we think about place, it's about a long-term view. And that means patient and flexible capital. And we're fortunate that we travel with our own capital stack. So we've got corporate and philanthropic cash. We do PRIs. We've got impact investments that we do on Prudential's balance sheet. And then we've got the P&L of our businesses that we're bringing into the equation now. And we've also got the time and talent of our executives and our employees. And so we try to drive social impact through all of that. And a couple of the other important elements are investing in local leaders. And so these are folks we're working side by side with every day to co-create solutions. They know their communities, they're in and of those places, and so we know they've got the best solutions. And then the last part is really, and this has evolved over time, but we are well situated and better situated in some cases than some of our colleagues in Newark to fund at a systems level. And so how do we create durable systems that are layered? And we know that people live their lives horizontally, but the systems they're dealing with are organized in silos and organized vertically. So how do we create a better set of systems that work better for people every day?
Thank you. And Karen, let's pull you in with the Colorado Health Foundation story and perspective. A large, diverse, fascinating state where you've had deep and broad impact as an impact investor. Tell us about that. What does place-based mean in your Colorado context?
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks, everyone, and I'm delighted to be here. As an aside, I want to say this is my first MIE conference, and in a small way, I feel like I'm at the house at Halloween that every kid wants to go to, because you give out full-size candy bars. That never happens at a health-focused conference. So thank you for the indulgence. So if we start with kind of the environment we're in now, our impact investing evolves and continues to evolve in spite of, despite of, and because of the current environment. We have 3 cornerstones to our work at the Colorado Health Foundation. First, everything we do is to advance equity. And so we too are part of the, what'd you call it, the front foot club? Mm-hmm. We're part of the front foot club in that we have not changed our language. We haven't asked our grantees to change. Our grantees are those communities we invest in to change their language because what they want is clarity from us at this time. So everything to advance health equity through racial justice. Number 2, we exist to be in service to, for, and alongside communities that live with low income, have historically had little power, are being disinvested in, and thirdly, community informed. And so it's the community part that we're focused on today. So yes, so while our geographic boundaries as the state of Colorado, as you said, it's a very diverse state. So within Colorado, as in every state, there are different cultures, there are different regions, there are different challenges by where they live and what the natural and man-built resources are, human-built resources are. So even though we're statewide, we have currently 9 communities across the state that we invest in heavily and that we are truly in strong relationship with. From like a 10-block urban core in the Denver area to Northeast Colorado, a county in Northeast Colorado that has a huge Somali population around a meatpacking plant, to Southwest Colorado that has undocumented and immigrants who have 9, 10, 11 generations of history in the community, and then over to our tribal nations, the Ute Mountain Ute and the Southern Ute. So we are in those communities in a very intentional and relational way over the long haul. Many times in this conference, we've talked about we've got to be in it for the long game and not to be distracted, as philanthropy can be sometimes, by the next new shiny object, but to stay the course. And be in community with them, well, that's a period. Be in community with them, hard stop. Sometimes we come with, there's money on the table. Sometimes it's not. We're just there in support. We're there in solidarity. And it's not just to know the organizations that we invest in. We want to know the entire community. What's the educational system like? What's the political landscape like? Who really calls the shots in that community, formally and informally? What are the challenges of the neighborhood? So we want to be in deep relationships, and because there are different cultures, it requires for us to be culturally competent, culturally aware, and culturally specific, and bring all of the philanthropic tools we have to bear to help support the community as it crafts its own way. And impact investing is certainly one of those tools.
Great. And I think let's dig a little more into the current context, specifically around the withdrawal of federal funding in some cases and the really unpredictable and turbulent policy environment. And just to give you a bit of a runway to this, those of you who know the Northwest Area Foundation know that we have a core commitment to funding in Indian country. 4 out of every 10 grant and PRI dollars for many, many years have gone to Native-led organizations and investees. The Native community has been hit especially hard and disrupted especially, shook up real good from what's gone on in the last year and a half. Native CDFIs in particular are a core part of our portfolio as a grant maker and as a PRI maker. And this is not my preamble to our brilliant solution to the turbulence of the moment. We have no brilliant solution. Our board did commit to do more, like as a first step. So we doubled our grants budget in 2025 and maintained that enhanced level of giving in 2026. That just struck us as a simple, straightforward way to say to the folks we were already in relationship with, we have your backs. We don't have all the answers, but we have resources, and we can help you more than we could have if we hadn't been willing to go there. But nonetheless, that does feel like a drop in the ocean given the dynamic disruptions that are happening. And I'm just curious from each of your perspectives, maybe we'll stick with you first, Karen, have there been ways that Colorado Health has been able to respond? We know that we can't backfill the withdrawal of federal resources. That math doesn't work, but just doing our normal thing doesn't work either. So I'm just curious if you have anything to share about how you've tried to be nimble in this environment.
Certainly. So you're right. We cannot replace the financial capital that comes from federal and even some state sources. But we can use the financial capital that we do have to invest in human capital in communities through technical assistance, through leadership development. We can use the financial capital we have to invest in developing the political capital of our communities. So as an example, in that 10-block corridor I was talking about in urban Denver, we made a seed grant to an organization that was working on displacement, supporting small businesses, and housing. Made a small seed planning grant. That turned into $1.5 million grant as part of their first housing project, then a $1.5 million PRI, then additional grants to help support the development of a resident committee so that the renters would govern themselves. And so that's an example, and that work continues in that community. That's an example of using the financial capital we have to invest in both the human capital and the political capital. And then just staying with and in a community, just not abandoning them, letting them know we're here for the long haul, we're here with you, for you, by you, and we'll do whatever we can to support you, is part of the nimbleness that we have to display at all times, but it has to be intensified in this time, and direct conversations with folks about, what's inbounds and outbounds to talk with us. I hear grantees, nonprofit organizations all the time saying, I just wish the philanthropic community would just tell us what we can say and what we can't say, what we can and cannot talk about with you. To whom do we need to change our language to get the funding? So, being clear, being in relationships, and having those deep-seated relationships that allow us to braid resources in the community is something we have been doing and need to continue to do, because that still gets us through to the long term.
Yeah. And Lata or Frank, anything to add on this point?
Yeah, as a corporate entity, we have different constraints. And if there are any other corporates out there, you may be in the same situation where, we're a federal contractor. And so that means a lot of different things. And I'll say, by the way, some of those federal contracts we're quite proud of. We are the group benefits provider for the Veterans Administration. So for officers and enlisted folks in the military, and that's something we've had for decades, and again, something that's quite meaningful to us. But having said that, in some ways, continuing to do the work in the fashion we've been doing it is the Revolutionary Act. But I'm proud to say we have continued, haven't missed a beat. And in some cases it is, Karen, a little bit of what you were saying around talking to, listening to, strategizing with our partners, with our community to understand how we can be most helpful, whether it's making connections, giving them access to things, adding additional dollars to what we've already provided to them. But I'll say the most important thing we're seeing, I think, is that the kinds of investments we've been making in infrastructure, whether it's physical infrastructure, the nonprofit infrastructure, local government, have been the things that have helped buffer organizations the most in this time of extreme volatility. And so having those entities in place that are kind of the backbones that can also be there on the ground every day has been most useful.
So for us, when, I'll just say, we call it the changing federal environment began, we developed a three-pronged structure around information, investment, and influence. And for us, a big part of our role as community foundations, for those who are familiar with community foundations, is that in many ways we are a center of gravity for philanthropic sector here in Atlanta, right? We help inform a lot of our partners because we work with corporations, family foundations, private foundations, and the 800 individuals who we work with on a daily basis. And so for us, it was really about informing our partners about what was going on as we were getting it, right? Because, as was said, we couldn't fill the gap that the federal government had left. And we didn't want to be reactive, we wanted to be responsive. And so for us, it was really making sure that we developed very quickly a very comprehensive understanding of how both the communities were being impacted as well as the nonprofits that support them, right? And I think the themes that we heard are probably the same themes that you heard. More and more folks are going to be hungry, more folks are going to be housing unstable, and more folks are not going to have access to primary care outside of the ER. And then certain communities, like immigrants or refugees, are going to be immediately impacted and much more deeply. And so sharing that and then thinking about, from an invest perspective, what can we do to come together to respond to that? And what we ended up doing was standing up two different pooled funds, one that was really focused on how do we, in those issue areas in those populations, for those nonprofits that support them, how do we help them think about how to reimagine their business model? Because this is, even if things come back some, it's not going to come back to what it was. So you have to change your business model. And then also doubling down on policy and advocacy work to think about what we can do at the local and state level to mitigate the harm coming from the federal level. And then the second thing is, and this gets to the earlier point around risk, you have to take more risk. For us, go back to, and some of you were in this breakout session, in October, the federal shutdown happened. Here in our community, 3 of the largest Head Start providers, because of the timing of their contract, was up at the end of October, and these 3 folks were going to have to shut their doors because they had no income. And 6,000 families and all their kids and 800 plus workers were going to be furloughed. And this was like a Tuesday. And so we didn't have an emergency bridge loan product to provide, neither did anyone else. But because the risk to those families is much greater than the financial risk to us, it's like, we need to figure that out. And so we ended up developing a bridge loan product in about 48 hours, and we were able to get partial loan guarantees from a lot of our funding partners so that we were willing to we were shouldering the risk together. And so to me, those are the kinds of things, again, that in uncertain times, we have we are in a very privileged space. We have the opportunity and the obligation to lean into that risk.
Fantastic. And thank you for pulling the risk conversation forward from yesterday. That was really powerful. And we want to shift the discussion a little bit now to the topic of scaling local efforts, which these headwinds in the current environment make that harder, I'm sure. And there are, I think, baked-in challenges to scaling a local project. How do you keep the people at the center? How do you keep what was good on a small scale as you grow to a bigger scale? How do you make sure the whole thing doesn't revolve around the capital providers in the end as opposed to the people who it is all for? So I just want to tee you all up for anything you might want to share about your own experiences, including either being a national player in a local effort that is scaling or pulling national players into something in your local environment. And I think we were going to start with you, Lata, on this one. Would you like to jump in there?
Sure. So maybe I'll share an example of we were kind of in the middle of that local and national piece. And I'm not speaking out of school. There's much that has been written about what I'm about to share. But some of you may be aware that in 2010, Mark Zuckerberg and then Mayor Cory Booker and then Governor Chris Christie announced that Zuckerberg was going to give $100 million to Newark to reform the education system there, and that they were requiring a $100 million match. So that meant $200 million was instantly going to be turned on and allocated to the city. That was unbeknownst to the local players. So that was news to a lot of folks. There wasn't a lot of local engagement. And by the way, all very well intentioned. We worked with these folks and we continue to work with everybody, but they were moving fast and breaking things, right? And so meanwhile, a group of local entities had set up a local education fund that had just launched about 6 months before all of this happened. And that had broad-based local buy-in and local leadership in the same mandate of helping to improve outcomes, educational outcomes for Newark students. And so now you had this insider-outsider dynamic being set up with the outsiders, the national entities, and the insiders, the local entities. And because Prudential spoke both languages, if you will, we were instrumental in setting up the local ed fund, we became the bridge. And so helped facilitate the conversations that at times were quite contentious, by the way. And they tested all of our values, so ours included, but everybody's beliefs about what education should look like and how it can best serve children. And so the local ed fund became actually the trusted table and convener for these conversations. And what we learned were, so again, it was ugly, it was hard, but I will say also the drama and the political and public nature of this obscured the very positive outcomes that came out of this. And so that was unfortunate because there were some things, both things learned about the process and how we got to where we got to, but the actual outcomes as well in the form of thousands of higher quality educational seats that were created. But the lessons we took away from this and things that we try to adhere to as we're going into other communities are probably these are the key ones. One is when you're going into the community, it's so important to understand the assets, right? So many times we start with a problem. We see a problem, we want to go in and solve it and fix it. Right, absolutely the wrong approach. It's what are the assets that exist? Who are the players, right? What's happening right now? What's the local context? And then where are the gaps and how can you help fill them? Investing in, again, local leaders, which seems obvious, but the folks who were coming in and investing, a lot of them were moving on eventually into other roles, higher office and so on. And so that left all of us to then kind of hold the bag, if you will. And so what's the infrastructure that exists that you can plug into rather than creating your own? And then third was really a hard lesson, right? A lesson for us and all the other local funders, and I would say for all of us, is we can't be so precious that we also don't think that we can learn, right, from these experiences. And so how do we open ourselves up to, again, those hard conversations and really come together to sort it out and get to a better place?
And Karen, could I tee you up next to share from your perspective?
When it comes to scale, I think I would start with the question of whose scale. Because the community's idea of scale may be very different than the foundation's ideas of scale. So if we're really going to center community, then we should start with what the community believes that scale should be, and then come along beside that and see what the foundation's goals are, and can we do that in collaboration with, can we do it alongside, does it happen in seriatim, but how does that, how do we make that dance work by keeping the community in the center? And again, for some folks, it may be, we just want scale us to the next block. Or in the rural communities, they don't talk in blocks in the rural community. It could be from the schoolhouse to the firehouse is the scale they want to go. An example for us in taking where the investees and our notions of scale matched was we invested first a $2.5 million PRI in an effort to support women-owned entrepreneurs. And that fund now has funded 42 female entrepreneurs, many people of color across rural Colorado, which is vast. And because it's vast, we're now investing in an additional $2.5 million PRI to add more dots to that map. So the idea of scaling that was to take it from the idea to a statewide rural effort, and we're excited about that progress and how we've been able to contribute to it.
Fantastic. And Frank, what about you?
So I'll start with something I'm pretty sure you will hear from Brian in a few minutes, which he always talks about getting proximate to the work, right? And the importance of getting proximate. And so to me, as you scale, the way to do that is you have to embed community in your process. We have community members on our investment committee, even though they may not have a lot of background in that. Because if it's just a bunch of former bankers and folks who are into this, they will very quickly just talk about the numbers. And your LTV, your debt coverage ratios, is too skinny, yada, 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 right? It helps ground it in our why, which is what we always need to do. And thinking about that at multiple levels, one of the things that I think can make us sometimes uncomfortable is that we'll talk about internally, at the end of the day, our ultimate stakeholders in our name is the community. It's not nonprofits or donors. It's the community. We partner with those two to support community. So how do we make sure we center them in that process while balancing these other things? The other thing I'll just share, I've done community development in some form or fashion for the last 25 years, is like some of my favorite sayings came from community members. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? So let's make sure they're at the table, right? You can only move as fast as the speed of trust. And I think those lessons apply not just to how we engage and scale, but also I think how national funders, when they do engage with us, how do they do that? Do they work with us or not? Because one of the things I'll say very directly is sometimes national funders come in and they don't engage with local funders, and 1 + 1 = less than 2 when that happens. We have to do a better job of aligning and integrating.
And
yes,
the corollary to that inside the state is, as a statewide funder, if we don't go into communities and first understand and get to know the local actors, we're also swooping. So it's the same dynamic, just at a different level.
Yep. Avoid swooping and keep asking yourself, whose strategy is this again? Those are good rules of the road for grant makers, and I think for impact investors as well. Well, our time has flown here. We are down to our sort of lightning round nuggets you'd like to leave with folks. So the audience has heard a lot about your work, and yet we're just scratching the surface, I know. And maybe we'll start at the end of the line with you, Lata, and just hear, what's that one thing, call to action or piece to hold on to that you would leave us with?
Yeah, so I think we're all aware that we are facing an existential crisis around the erosion of trust in institutions. And without trust, progress isn't possible, right? Systems will fail, capital won't flow efficiently, partnerships won't be formed. And what we also know is that trust is hyper-local, and that's where it begins and that's where it ends. And so this notion of place-based investing in place, is more critical now than ever, because trust is the currency that we all deal in, and it's long-term capital that we all need.
I would say that, and we have many philanthropic tools at our disposal, and some of them are the right tool for different situations. Impact investing is a tool, and it's a tool we should use strategically. It's a tool we should not be capricious with, and it's a tool that can have great impact if we continue to center community. So I think my parting comments are: get in it, stay in it for the long haul. Be patient, and one of my favorite sayings is go as fast as you can, but as slow as you must.
I like that one. I would just really kind of double down on the importance of place, the importance of local, to be able to really be able to scale the kind of impact we want to see, right? 2 days ago, we heard, the W.E.B. Du Bois quote, as goes the South, so goes the nation. I'll use another local, two poets from Atlanta. The South has something to say. And I think, to me, that's an example of how do we do a better job of marrying the local funders and the context, the credibility, and the on-the-ground infrastructure they have with the resources that national folks have. Because what we do know is that we haven't been able, a lot of great work has been done by local and national funders, that it hasn't moved the needle enough in our communities in the South. And so we have to reimagine how we partner to change that dynamic, change that trajectory. And I think it has to be a partnership.
And I'll take a turn in the lightning round to say a couple of things. One is, again, those of you who heard the panel yesterday and the comments about risk-taking and the importance of taking more risk, that is very resonant. And I just want to offer the shadow of that, which is in our attempt to understand the risks we're choosing to take, my call to us as funders and investors would be make sure you're asking yourself, okay, if this goes badly, who's going to bear the pain of the risk I have chosen to take? The answer needs to be the foundation or the investor, not the community, right? And I just always like to keep that piece in the mix because part of our privilege is we can be proud of our risk-taking behaviors, and then if something goes sideways, the pain gets felt in community much more than in our offices. So remember that it's all about community at the center, and yes, be bold and be willing to take risks and get out of our comfortable spaces in these times. And then my final comment is a bit of an on-ramp for Brian Stevenson, whose life and work I admire tremendously. I had the chance to go to the legacy sites that the Equal Justice Initiative has created in Montgomery with the board and staff of the Northwest Area Foundation last year. And it was a life-changing, profound experience for many of us. And the thought I want to leave with is that in these times, in this environment, don't underestimate the power of telling the truth. There is immense beauty and power in telling the truth. That is what Brian has done in his work in Montgomery and elsewhere. It's a real honor to just warm up this stage for him. But that's not an investing piece of advice. It's not even philanthropy advice for me. It's just human advice. We need to remember to tell the truth. There is beauty and power in doing that. So thank you for having us. Let's have a round of applause for our panelists.
Well, let's just another huge thank you to Kevin, Karen, Frank, and Lata for such an inspiring conversation. As my colleague James said at the beginning of this conversation today, local place-based work is more important than ever, and I really hope the truth-telling that this panel shared with us and the lessons they shared, we will all bring back to our organizations and communities. And I should have let Kevin introduce Brian Stevenson, but before I do, I just want to thank everyone in this room again, all of you for being here for the last 3 incredible days. I hope you all got a large candy bar. If not, we may have some on the way out. And more importantly, I just want to thank everyone who made this possible, the speakers, the sponsors, and in particular, our team at MIE and the hotel, but just a huge thank you to the MIE team. If you could stand up if you're in the room.